Let's move on now to our third topic, and it's the importance of ESG and healthy corporate cultures. And so this may well, this hopefully will address the point earlier on about the E and the S, but where's the G? And hopefully this will be more focused on the G. So Matthew is the CIO at Artemis Investment Management. And clearly, as a fund manager, Artemis undertake around 2,000 meetings with company management teams each year. So Matthew is well placed to give us a flavour of how ESG is being embraced by listed corporates and how this plays into their corporate cultures. So Matthew, over to you, please.
Well, look, I think in short, Tim, look, it is being embraced, and it's being embraced because corporates recognise it's important, and they recognise it's important because it's certainly important to us as asset managers, and it's important to us as asset managers because it's important to our clients, all of our stakeholders. And so that message really is getting through that society, that all stakeholders want ESG to be embraced. And obviously, as asset managers, allocators of capital, we have certainly one voice that can help persuade and cajole and hopefully prompt change. And I think what's so different today versus say 10, 15 years ago was we look around society generally and how behavior was being nudged to change. It wasn't necessarily shareholders or stakeholders or society. It was often regulators. In fact, I was thinking the other day about the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and how really behavioral change there. What I think we'd all recognize was not great corporate culture, and not just in the financial services sector, but generally we need to go back to even 2000 and issues with Enron or WorldCom, the malfeasance that we saw across large swathes of corporate culture. It was regulators that drove change. And think back to the GFC, all the government money that was pumped into maybe the banks. It was then the banks, the regulators, that controlled how these companies behaved, restricted their ability to pay dividends, about how they could pay their executives. Now that's in sharp contrast to now. And in terms of real life example, one of my fund managers mentioned to me just last week that they'd had a call from a company where we're a pretty large shareholder. It's not a particularly large cap company, this. And they called us to ask for advice. And the advice was this: we've taken money in the recent UK government furlough scheme because we have a number of employees that we've justified putting on furlough. And the question to you, our shareholder, our largest shareholder today, is, does that mean we can't or shouldn't pay a dividend? Does that mean that we shouldn't or can't pay corporate bonuses this year, even though that scheme was available to us and we've utilised it? Is that inconsistent? And it just struck me that two-way outreach, that contemplation of what would the wider stakeholder base think about this, was a conversation that probably would never have happened 10 years ago. And to me, that was a great vignette, if you like, to summarize how corporate culture has responded and started to embrace other wider stakeholder needs. And then maybe just lastly, in terms of like a prepared remark, again, just to emphasize how much this has changed, it took me right back to my time as a global fund manager. And I remember very, very vividly visiting a company called Costco. I think everyone knows Costco, the large cash and carry supermarket chain, Washington, Seattle based, so same geography as Amazon. And I remember there was uproar at the time about how little they used to care about shareholders. And obviously, as a fund manager, you want a company to care about shareholders above everything. And the reason this was so controversial is because you walked into their rather ramshackle corporate HQ. And it was ramshackle because they were tight on how they allocated their money. And it had their code of ethics written on the wall. And I went on the Costco website just to remind myself of the corporate ethics. So forgive me while I read this. But it says, it's still there on their wall today. Number 1, obey the law. Number 2, take care of our members. Number 3, take care of our employees. Number 4, respect our suppliers. And then it says, if we do these 4 things throughout our organization, then we'll achieve our ultimate goal, which is to reward our shareholders. And I thought it was a very neat summary of how a company, even today, is balancing all of societal needs. And knowing that if they get that right culturally, and that's culturally embedded in their business, the governance almost takes care of itself. Everything else just takes care of itself. And that really is what we're looking for as asset managers. And increasingly, I think it's what corporates themselves are getting.